I'm Cheryl Chumley. This is Bold and Blunt, giving you a Christian conservative view of news, politics, culture, and events. Gal Kalev, thank you so much for being back on Bold and Blunt. It's great to speak with you again. You are in Jerusalem right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm right in front of the old city of Jerusalem. You can see the walls behind me.
Oh, what a beautiful day it is! It looks like there. So there's a lot going on, though.
Yeah.
There's a lot taking place right now, politically speaking, in America, criticizing Benjamin Netanyahu's handling of the war against Hamas. And I wanted to dive right in and talk about this embargo of weapons that Joe Biden is trying to put in place. How is that being received in Israel?
Not well, to say is an understatement. We have always viewed the United States as an ally, and they are an ally, and we're grateful for the support that the Biden administration has provided throughout the war, but not in its behavior over the last few weeks. And the idea that we're fighting a war against Hamas, against terrorism, this is the front of the Western world war against terrorism. We're fighting it, and Biden is imposing embargo against us. So it's not being received well. One of the ministers, the minister of police, wrote a bad tweet saying Hamas loves Biden. Now, he should not write that as a minister. But, does Hamas love the actions of Biden? Of course. The sanctions against military units, the embargo. So this is not being received well in Israel.
So Joe Biden, the administration has clarified a bit, and they're fighting back on the characterization of this White House turning against Israel or changing its policy on Israel by saying the weapons that they want to prohibit Israel from getting are only those that are more like scatter bombs. They're not precision strike munitions. What do you know about that?
Well, I know that there's a slippery slope here of actions by the Biden administrations that curtails our ability to fight, curtails our ability to win the war, curtails our ability to end the war, curtails the ability. They say they're concerned about Palestinians, Gazans, human rights. The Palestinians want the war to end too. Why does Biden want to prolong the war by tying our hands in fighting and defeating Hamas? So we've seen a slippery slope that started a few months ago. We spoke when the first round of sanctions were imposed. And I said back then when we spoke, this is, we haven't had sanctions against the Jews for decades that target specifically Jewish people. Now, the sanctions originally target Jewish criminals who engage in violence against Palestinians. But, there's much more anti-Arab violence in the United States. We had the shooting in Vermont, murder in the Midwest. There's much more anti-Arab violence in France. Biden singles out Israelis, starts sanctioning people, then sanctioning organizations, then sanctioning those organizations that provide legal defense or fundraise for defense of those people who were sanctioned in the first round. And then a few weeks ago, they announced that word came out that sanctions are coming out against the Israeli military, against a unit of the Israeli military. And it's not even because of the Gaza war. And it's not even because of some structural bad behavior in the military. It's because supposedly of an incident that happened a couple of years ago, a tragic incident where during arrests of a Palestinian suspect, one of the detainees tragically died. This is obviously a horrible thing, and that was investigated by Israel, and people paid a price and got penalized. The administration, so they're sanctioning an entire unit in the middle of battle, in the middle of war. The Navy has 3,700 criminal investigation that it started against people in the Navy in 2002 alone. So does this mean that you're going to start now sanctioning the Navy, defund the Navy like you're threatened to defund this military unit? And then what came out, that it's not just this military unit, there's two other military units. So Biden starts targeting Israeli military units. Then there's this other word that, we don't want you to go into Rafah, so we're not going to provide you with the weapons that goes into Rafah. And then there is what you just mentioned, the embargo and the backtrack. On that particular point, it's just those particular weapons. But the direction here of, this sort of fluidity, this sort of like, we're sometimes with Israel and sometimes with Hamas, is something that we haven't seen in American policy before. This is, as we spoke last time, a departure in the American attitude towards the war on terrorism.
Yes, it seems very dangerous to many in America as well. Basically, that this administration has changed long-standing ally policy with Israel. And I'm just wondering, look back over the last 7 months of what's come out of this White House and how the war is progressing in Israel against Hamas. And do you see any scenario where this White House could have done things differently, where the war would be ended right now, where Hamas would be defeated?
Well, we don't know, but the rumors at least are that there were, right from the beginning, there were an enormous amount of restrictions that was placed on the Netanyahu government by Blinken and the Biden administration, including in withdrawing from areas that we already conquered and things like that. So we don't, like journalists can always speculate exactly what happened between, when Netanyahu meets Blinken, but there's been word that we were stopped, that we were curtailed from day one. But, certainly, the whole notion, this is, I think, much more dangerous than the war, because this is, as we spoke all along, there's a dual front assault on the Jewish nation here. One is the physical assault that is carried by Hamas and the other Iran proxies. But the other one that is much more dangerous to the survival of Judaism is the ideological assault that is coming from the West. Now, it was the media, and it was the UN, and it was countries in Europe. We never thought it's going to come from the White House. The assault on our ability to defend ourselves, trying to create a narrative that we are the bad guys here, sanctioning Jewish peoples in Israel, sanctioning military units. That is very, very concerning, because it fuels the incitement against Israel. So when you see violence in the streets of New York, when you see synagogues are being targeted, that the Biden actions has an input into that. I remember years ago I heard Benny Gantz, who's now sort of the number two guy in the government and a candidate essentially to replace Bibi. He was defense minister, and he said when Amnesty issues a ludicrous report that accuses the Jewish state of apartheid, which they did at his time, synagogues and houses of worship in California are being targeted. So there is a causality between actions that are the ideological war against the Jewish nation, accusing us of dehumanization, of being a pariah opposed by the rest of the world. All those things have consequences, because as it is, even before the war, more than 70% of the attack against American Jews were sourced because of anti-Israel rhetoric, because of Israel bashing, because somebody was incited. So we spend, years and resources of making sure that, people in the mosques behind us in the old city and elsewhere don't incite against Israel. But now we have incitements against Israel coming from the White House, and that could result in violence. But more so, Cheryl, it's an existential threat to the whole of Judaism, because what does it lead to? If you can create this narrative that Biden is creating through those sanctions, through defunding the military, through calling us names, dehumanization, pariah, then people in Europe, people in international criminal courts might say, oh, we're going to start arresting Israelis. We're going to invest Israeli soldiers. We're going to investigate Israeli soldiers. We're going to, when an Israeli civilian, because we're all soldiers, in reserves, go to Europe for a conference, we are going to, impose an arrest warrant on him. So Israelis will not be able to travel. So there's a path to destruction, and it goes through demoralization, through sanctions, through attrition. And sadly, Biden's actions are putting that path of destruction to Judaism in action, whether it's intentionally or unintentionally.
So you can kind of, to go toward that point, you can kind of see in recent headlines how the rhetoric toward that path is already gearing up. And I want to make sure I get the wording right on this. But there was a message that came out, and I'm reading from a side note I have here right now, that Israel's use of U.S. weapons in Gaza has likely violated international humanitarian law, according to this administration, though they can't point to specifics. So it's that type of dangerous rhetoric that you're referencing, correct?
Absolutely, and worse. I mean, Blinken called us, implied that we're dehumanizing Palestinians, and then in Munich said that the worst, the dehumanization is the worst poison in our commonwealth, or something to that effect. I mean, there is continuous rhetoric against Israel, and now the rhetoric has turned into action. But let's cut through this. I mean, we sort of going around it. Everybody assumes that this is all about the campaign to re-elect. That there's some pollster or somebody is Michigan young voters, so we're gonna be more, we're gonna bash Israel a little bit more. We're gonna throw the Jews under the bus. So that's what it's all about. And my thought to Biden, if some pollster says that anti-Semitism, because it is anti-Semitism, I mean, like arguing that the Jews in Israel dehumanize Palestinians is the same as arguing that Jews dehumanized Europeans a century ago, when Schumer gets on the Senate floor and basically accuses the Jewish state of being a pariah opposed by the rest of the world. That's exactly what we were accused last century and what we were accused, in the book of Esther by Amen. So you have this rhetoric that's coming out of the Biden administration, and that is very concerning. So if some pollster says, well, we need that to win Michigan, then why don't you have rhetoric against American Jews? Why are you targeting Israeli Jews for your anti-Semitism? Because that's much more dangerous. Because 70%, 80%, even before the war, now it's probably higher, of the violence that is coming against American Jews is because of anti-Israeli rhetoric. So if Biden wants, if he thinks it's helps some political, put out a tweet, Jews will not replace us. The Jews have too much power. That will be clear anti-Semitic, but so is the rhetoric and now actions that are coming out of administration that's completely against American values to defund military units as they're fighting in the middle of a war and impose sanctions on them. By the way, remember that the unit was accused of having an Islamophobic rhetoric or behavior years ago. That sanctions got pulled, and some people think that it's because, like 2 days after those sanctions were threatened, that military unit sadly suffered a loss in a battle in Gaza, and the person who died fighting alongside them was a Muslim, an Israeli Muslim soldier, a Bedouin Scout fighting alongside Netzach Yehuda died. So it completely ruined the rhetoric of an Islamophobic unit. But this goes to the essence. If Biden thinks that and I cannot imagine why he thinks that anti-Jewish rhetoric or action can win him votes in Michigan, then he's better off directing it against American Jews, where there's less violence, where it's less likely to result in violence and actions by the International Criminal Courts than it's against Israeli Jews. And and I'm not quite sure I understand the politics. I don't know who is doing those polling, because now some people are saying that New York State is at play. I mean, this is astonishing that in New York State, where where Biden won by 27%, I believe, and it's usually 25, 30% margin against the Republican. Now it's only 10%. So Biden is only 10% above Trump. And you have all those Jewish voters who are not going to tell the pollster that they're going to vote for Trump. My Jewish friends, I remember, when one of my friends in New York wants to tell me that he's voting for Trump, he closes the door, swears me to secrecy, and then confesses. I mean, they're not telling a random pollster on the phone they're voting for Trump. So that 10% does not include a suppressed vote. So how many, like 70% or so of Jews voted for Biden? What is the number that's going to be that are going to vote for him in this go around? If it's 50%, he might lose New York State. So all of a sudden, there's sort of like, fine, it's politics, but this politics is off, because the American people are much more with Israel than the administration is. And certainly the Jewish people that are now facing an existential threat. I mean, it's different when it's other issues, when it's just like this or that. This is Jews feel what they felt back in the Holocaust. I know, because I talked to my Jewish friends in New York, in Pennsylvania, and others, and this is real. And when people face an existential threat, that affects the way they vote, even if they need to compromise with certain values that they have. And that's something that you cannot poll. You cannot, poll how, how likely, that nobody's going to tell the pollster I'm voting for Trump.
Let me get this one last question in before we have to hang up. And I just want to read you this quote that 26 Democrats in Congress, Democrats now, sent a letter to Joe Biden expressing concerns about his recent actions with Israeli policy. They say they are, quote, deeply concerned about the message this administration is sending to Hamas and other Iranian backers of terrorist proxies by withholding weapon shipments to Israel. Just briefly, Gal, just sum up if that's something that you see leading to a political backlash in the Democrat Party against this White House come election time.
Absolutely. It's impossible to tell at this point. The only way to tell this is really through funding. And people are saying that the funders are still behind Biden. But we had one funder, Chaim Saban, a Democratic funder, writing an angry letter to Biden, basically threatening that he's going to pull, or implicitly threatening he's going to pull funding. But, there's definitely this rhetoric. I speak to progressive friends of mine, Jews and non-Jews, and they're very, very concerned with what is Biden. This is against American values. This is actions that are immoral. To defund a military unit funding for you because you find some ridiculous excuse because you think it helps you in the polling. And I even heard this conspiracy theory out there that this is so politically damaging to Biden, as indicative from the letter from the Democratic senators, that maybe it's forces in the Democratic Party that are trying to get Biden to step down. So they're trying to make him, take actions that are so ludicrous, like the embargo and stopping and sanctioning Israelis, left and right. There's a joke here in Jerusalem: when you pay with your credit cards, people say, "Oh, well, let's find out if you got sanctioned by Biden," because Biden's actions do not make sense from an American foreign policy point of view. They do not make sense from an American defense point of view. They do not make sense from an American values point of view. And to me, they also don't make sense from a political, even if it's a narrow political calculation. So I don't know what's going on there, but it's very concerning.
And if it all leads to people not voting for Joe Biden in November and Donald Trump coming back in the White House, that's good for America, good for Israel. So I want to thank you once again for your time, Gal Kalev, author of Judaism 3.0, columnist for the Jerusalem Post in Jerusalem today. Thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. We'll talk soon.
My pleasure.